Welcome, everyone. I'm Liz Buttry, the Training Coordinator for the Clinical Coordinating Center. I'd like to take a moment to thank my fellow CTN members, Ron Jackson and Charlotte Royer-Malvestuto, for presenting today and sharing with us their expertise. During today's session, we will be opening the phone lines periodically. We welcome your interaction and request that you take your phone off speaker while speaking, as it really helps your voice come through clearly, and as you know, the session will be recorded today. So before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to ask a few polling questions just to get an idea of who we have in our audience today. Let me go ahead and pull those questions up.
Liz, we're not seeing anything on the screen.
You're not seeing anything?
No.
How about right now?
No. Nothing.
I am.
We might have to re-log in.
Okay, so you guys can jump off and we'll go ahead and get started.
Well, okay, here we go.
What is your experience level in clinical research? 0 to 1 year, 2 to 3 years, 4 to 5 years, or 6 or more? Looks like we have a 50-50.
We only got 2 people talking to us.
Uh-huh.
Maybe others can't see it either.
Yeah, it says the polls are closed down in the...
Go ahead and see what's going on here.
Okay, we're still not seeing it.
How are things now?
Better.
Okay, all right.
Nothing.
Nothing. Operator, can we go ahead and open those phone lines for a moment?
Click on the link.
Yes, one moment.
For additional okay, hold on.
Are the phone lines open now?
Phone lines are open.
Okay, everybody, how are we doing? Are we seeing things on screen?
I am.
The polls closed.
Yeah, I am, but
right, we're able to, in the Ohio Valley News, we're able to see it, but it won't take our poll results.
All right, we'll fix that.
That's the same with us as well.
It took mine a second to take the poll results, but now it's beginning to work.
Okay, could be things are moving a little slowly, but it'll get wound up in just a minute. Everything's opened up right now? Okay, the responses are fully open. Okay, operator, if we can go ahead and close those lines again.
Okay, one moment.
Thank you.
And lines are now muted once again.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'll just give people a second to get caught up. Sorry about that, folks.
Sure, and another screen, but leave this up. Down the other.
Okay, it looks like we got everybody. And I'll go ahead and move on. I was going to ask what your role in your study is, or what your study role is. And the polls are now open. Okay, great. Let me go ahead and show you guys. So as you can see, we have about 29% people who are study coordinators, 26% research assistants, about 17% even at node staff and other. A small number of sub-investigators and clinicians. So at this time, I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to you, Ron. You ready?
I am.
All right.
So, hi, everybody, and thanks very much for taking the time out of everybody's busy schedule to join us today. I'm real fortunate to be presenting with Charlotte, and I also want to acknowledge Liz's hard work in putting this whole thing together. Without her expertise and diligence, we wouldn't have much to go on. So let me talk a little bit about the goals of the training. It's important that this is a discussion rather than just a presentation. All right, Liz, are you changing the slides or am I?
I'll drive for you.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't.
That's okay.
we're going to talk a lot about the principles that inform decision-making as it relates to ethical practice in clinical research. But it's important to take it beyond the abstract and talk about real-life situations and circumstances that have come up for you. I want to acknowledge the people that took the time to submit some circumstances, some situations to Liz. She put out a call earlier and asked for some feedback, and it's got some great situations, and we're going to use some of those in the course of today's presentation. We put these slides together in such a way as to organize our thinking and to generate questions. The first part of this presentation is really kind of a history lesson. We're going to go back and look at how ethical codes and then ethical rules, in some cases laws, came into being and why they're necessary in light of historic abuses. We're then going to talk about the 7 principles, really, that underpin ethical practice in research studies, and we're going to be talking about specific circumstances in each of those. We'll be using illustrations from past and current CTN studies to talk about some of those principles and how they apply. And then, of course, as I talked about, we're going to be exploring these ethical dilemmas that you have. And so there are going to be times throughout today's presentation when we're going to open the phone lines, and we really do invite a lot of discussion, because that's where we learn. We learn from each other. Trying to walk that high road of ethics, it's the road that all of us want to stay on all the time, and yet, as this little cartoon portrays, sometimes it's a very narrow path, and it's easy to think that we're on the path, and next thing we know, we've stepped off it, and we're into that sort of morass that you see at the bottom. I mean, very good people have made mistakes when they get into that place about the end justifying the means. And one of the beautiful things, I think, about participating in CTN studies is that you're not alone, and that if something is feeling not right to you, that's a signal to you that it's time to start asking for help from your supervisor, from your colleagues. In many cases, that's really the next step to do, and we'll talk about the need for supervision and the need for supervisory support a little bit later on. Charlotte, you with us?
Yes, thanks, Ron. It just cut, the sound just cut off.
Okay. Well,
but yes, hi. I just wanted to welcome everyone as well. Like Ron, I'm happy to be here, and I hope that this format for today's presentation will encourage people to talk and bring up examples of experiences that they've had while bringing up our studies. I wanted to also mention that the cartoon that Liz provided, in fact, throughout the presentation, she's provided a number of really good and fun clip art, really does speak to the road that, you walk every day in carrying out our trials. Liz, I just want to clarify that the sound is on.
Yeah, you're on.
The sound is on. Everything
Great,
is fine. Ready to roll, Charlotte.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I really like the quote that we have at the top of this slide, which is that those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat their mistakes, by George Santayana. There's another that I think really applies to the work that we do, and that's by English statesman and philosopher Edmund Burke, who said that evil flourishes when good men do nothing. And I think it's something, when Ron talked about the high road, that we really need to keep in mind in regards to when we see things that we think are wrong, to address them. This slide represents what I would call the tipping points in regulation of human subjects research. You will notice as we go through some of these documents that regulation became increasingly more stringent in response to public awareness of some of the terrible things that were happening in science. Which came about following the Nuremberg trials when 23 German physicians were charged with crimes against humanity. And the Nuremberg Code established that the Nuremberg Code established that consent, informed consent, and voluntary participation were required. But research abuses were not limited to Nazi physicians, particularly following World War II in the Cold War period. Violations continued as a result of national security concerns and interests in attaining superiority in medical and scientific advancement. In 1964, the World Medical Association established guidelines for physicians that were summarized in the Declaration of Helsinki. And that document governs international research and actually provides the basis for the good clinical practices that we use today. As a direct result of the publicity following the Tuskegee syphilis study, human subjects protections were codified. A national commission was convened to develop principles and guidelines for use for human subjects research. The Belmont Report is often referred to as the most important document in the field of bioethics. Specific documents was one of the first to ensure the rights of the subjects. It first time really recognized that doctors could not set the rules for ethical conduct, even if they were guided by beneficence and the Hippocratic Oath. The motivation for scientific research for physicians is different than for clinical purposes. And so it became clear that although doctors were aware of the need to follow ethical principles, they didn't always do so or police themselves. And the Nuremberg Code, which advocated voluntary participation and informed consent, was one of the first steps to really ensure that that kind of protection was in place for research participants. The Declaration of Helsinki in 1964 outlined the principles for how we conduct all medical research. And it, for the first time, really declared that the subject's interest was more important and had precedence over the interests of science and society. It called for independent review and monitoring of research and very careful assessment of the risks and benefits of participation. The document also was one of the first to identify the obligations of study physicians beyond treatment of the patient, but also in the role of authors and also for publishers. And the Belmont Report, which, as we've said, came out of, I think, just tremendous surprise in regards to the public about Tuskegee, and that for the first time, I think it was difficult to say that some of the things that had occurred in regards to research atrocities couldn't happen here. So the Belmont Report is really the key reference document that influenced our federal regulations and guidelines for research. It established 3 ethical principles, and actually it established 4. You'll see in your materials that we have listed 4, but respect for persons or autonomy, beneficence, and non-maleficence or do no harm, and justice. Ron, would you like to add anything?
No, I think you've covered it well. Now we're gonna talk about these 7 principles, and I'm going to go over them sort of briefly here. And this comes from an article by Emmanuel Wendler and Charlene Grady that was published by JAMA in 2000, and we're going to go over these in great detail and use some illustrations and draw back upon that last item that Charlotte just talked about, those 4 basic principles of biomedical ethics, which come from the work of Beecham and Childress. So let's talk about this valuable scientific question. You can see them all there. I'm not going to belabor you with reading all these off to you. We're going to go over these in return. So I want to stop for a minute here and ask the operator to open the phone lines and see if any of you have any thoughts or questions or concerns so far.
It'll be just one moment. And as a reminder to our listeners today, please make sure that your phone is off of mute, as all lines will be open at this time. All lines are now open.
Anybody got anything that they want to say or discuss or any feedback before we on through these 7 items? Okay then, so off we go. Let's talk about a value. In order for a research study to be scientifically grounded, you can turn them off now, operator. Thank you. In order for a research study to be thought of as complying with ethical standards, it has to be asking a valuable scientific question. Otherwise, why are we putting participants at risk, whatever risk there might be, in order to do this work? There has to be value to science, and through science to the community for this particular work. And so we're going to focus for a minute or two here on 2 different studies that were done, one a medication trial and the other a behavioral trial in the CTN. The foundation for CTN 0027, the START study, was concerns by the Food and Drug Administration and by other scientists about whether or not there were any differences in liver effects of the 2 medications that are predominantly used to treat opioid dependence, and those are methadone and Suboxone. And so it's an important question and a valuable question, because a substantial proportion of the people who are going to be using these medications for the treatment of their addiction also may have compromised livers as a result of hepatitis or other kinds of issues. And so we wanted to make sure, the FDA wanted to make sure in a post-marketing sort of study to do this kind of work. And so they had an agreement with the manufacturer of Suboxone to do that work. And so that was really the foundation. This is a valuable, important scientific question. So let's go forward and spend the time and effort and recruit volunteers to participate in the study so as to learn the facts of this situation. Charlotte?
The motivational incentive studies, CTN 006 and 007, we're looking at comparing several different interventions to see which might result in better retention and less drug use than treatment as usual alone. The same as with medication trials, there has to be a genuine state of equipoise regarding the best treatment option. There really needs to be a recognized gap in knowledge, and the question has to be clear, relevant, and to bring about data that will inform this knowledge gap. The motivational studies were based on work that had been done previously by Maxine Spitzer, Jessica Pierce, Nancy Petrie, and other PIs within the CTN. And we have found historically that contingency management does make a difference and can bring about results in behavior that we're trying to achieve. But the question was, would adding incentives result in better retention and less drug use than treatment as usual alone? One of the things I heard at a conference was that in regards to the question, it's not a fishing trip. so that the question has to address what it is that you're hoping to find out. If the question doesn't address and get the data that will answer and the primary hypothesis, then you have very little with your study. You have very little information, and it raises the question of whether it was respectful to even move forward with the study. Liz, I see you're on the methodology slide. Is that correct?
So I'll add to this as well. We have just, I think, pretty well completed the 12-step study in the CTN, and some of you may have wondered, well, why bother doing that? What's this valuable scientific question? Don't we know that 12-step works, and don't we know through Project Match that 12-step facilitation was also effective? Well, the answer to that is no, we don't know from Project Match. We can't generalize from Project Match because their 12-step facilitation was done with people who were alcohol dependent, and that may or may not necessarily translate to people who have addiction to psychostimulants. And so that's why that's an important scientific question. So at the very beginning of the design of a protocol, it comes the question, really, is this worth doing? Does this answer a valuable scientific question? And I want to echo what Charlotte said, and that is principal investigators, research institutes should not be funding or conducting fishing expeditions where you're trying to find if there's something out there. You've got to begin with an accurate question, and it has to be of value both to science and potentially to the people who might benefit from the application of whatever intervention that is. So I want to move along now to the next principle, which is assuming that you've got a valuable scientific question, what's the best way to conduct the trial? And it has to have a valid scientific methodology. And I'm going to talk about drug trials, and Charlotte's going to talk about behavioral trials. Well, you wouldn't, first of all, want to expose an insufficient number of individuals to this experimental intervention if at the end of the day you didn't have enough people to be able to understand what their results meant. So that's why scientists, researchers spend a lot of money and a lot of time on power analyses, trying to figure out, okay, what do we know from previous studies, what kind of effect size might we anticipate, and how many people do we need to do? It would be a shame. Let's say you really needed 1,000 people in order to be able to distinguish the effects of treatment as usual versus an experimental intervention. You needed 500 in each arm. And if you only went to 800 or 900 and stopped there, that would mean that 800 or 900 people had been exposed to this research project for no reason whatsoever. And so that's why a lot of attention needs to be paid. It's an ethical consideration. You want to make sure that, we'll use START as an example. The reason, many of you know that Suboxone is most commonly administered through office-based physicians. Okay, fine. So why run this liver effect study in methadone clinics? And the answer to that is, well, there's a big difference between office-based practice with Suboxone and clinic-based practice with methadone, the primary one of which is that in methadone treatment, patients have to ingest their medication under the observation of a dispensing nurse. In office-based practice, the Suboxone patient simply gets a prescription for their Suboxone and off they go to the pharmacy. Well, if you're going to understand whether there are any, try to understand whether there are any differential effects on liver function, you want to make sure that people are being equal, in both of those arms, are being equally exposed to the medication. So the way to do that is to make sure that they're taking it under observation, you're getting compliance, and so forth and so on. If you didn't do that, you couldn't necessarily understand that whatever difference, if any, in the liver effects might be due to compliance as opposed to medication. So there you are. The reason that the START study used a central laboratory was so that the blood that was drawn from all the START participants went from all around the various sites across the country, went to a central laboratory in Georgia. That was to eliminate the variability that might be present in liver function testing if it was done at 2 or 3 or 5 different laboratories. Again, this is back to trying to make sure that the methodology is of sufficient validity so that we're being respectful to the participants whose blood we're taking, whose time we're taking, whose goodwill we're using. Continuing on with the START study, the reason that there was frequent liver testing, people say, well, why don't you just take it at the start and take it at the end and minimize all the hassle for the patients and all the extra expense? Well, you want to do it this way so as to protect what might be thought of as a vulnerable population, people whose livers might be negatively affected by the medication that you're giving them. So the idea was to do frequent liver testing to see if there was any signal that might hint at one problem or another with one medication or the other. And last but not least, we had to make sure that there was exposure of sufficient duration to these medications to determine whether you would get a problem or not. If we had selected a shorter period of time, it would have been less expense for the study, less a hassle for participants and so forth and so on, but that might not have been sufficient exposure in order to pick up the effects that we're looking to detect. So all of these 5 points really turn back on the principle of you're trying to do no harm to patients, you're trying to make sure that they're being taken care of, and that the study that you've designed and are now conducting is going to answer the question that was so important to ask. And I'll turn it over to Charlotte for the behavioral trial.
Thanks, Ron. For the behavioral trials, Ron has said, it really doesn't differ in regards to the various design elements or specific methodology that we'll want to evaluate in order to set up the trial. But it does require that, and when we look at a trial like the contingency management trials, that we've considered whether the results will be generalizable. One of the issues in the CTN, particularly with contingency management and with some of the dissemination activities, has been whether the intervention can be transferred to real-world practice. With 006 and 7, I know that one of the major design concerns had to do with establishing what a reasonable contingency would be, one that would get the effect that was desired, but at the same time would be something that a clinic, a community clinic in particular, might be able to maintain if the interventions proved successful. There's several additional elements of methodology that I wanted to talk about in regards to these two. Participant selection is very important. When we look at whether or not we're including mandated patients, be it through drug court or through Department of Transportation, various employment contracts, we want to be sure that the design addresses and can justify why it is that we are including these patients, and that the analysis can tease out the effect between the mandated status and incentive condition, so that we really know whether the intervention that we've been testing is working. In addition, I think that site selection for both medication and behavioral trials has been a significant methodology issue in some of our trials. Oftentimes, as we go into sites, we find that we have adequate numbers of patients, but staff retention may be very low. Accessibility to the clinic might be difficult. And so all of these things which influence the patient participation have to be looked at and actually built into the design. The issue of fidelity is one that we heard a lot about at the last CTN steering committee meeting. it's not likely that supervision will be something that will be transferred from our studies if we find that an intervention is successful, such as MI or MET, or even cognitive behavioral therapy, unless we can be sure that there's fidelity in implementing the intervention. And we've found that it is very difficult to find a way to pay for supervision time. And that has a huge impact in real-world practice, and it would have a big impact on whether or not the intervention could be continued and be successful if that component is lacking. Ron, did you want to add anything?
No, I think you just keep on trucking. You're doing great.
Hey,
All right, so now we've got a scientific question that's valid, and we've come up with a study plan that is of sufficient methodology in order to be able to answer that question. Now, who are we going to get to do this? Who's going to participate in our study? And now we're looking at the 3 of the 4 pillars of biomedical ethics, and we haven't forgotten autonomy here. Trust me, we'll get there. So you've got to figure out how to select people fairly, and that really is all involved in the inclusion and exclusion criteria. The first test of a study, whether it's the experimental arm versus the treatment as usual arm, is that the researchers, and through them all of the research staff, have to have what is called equipoise. It means that we have no reason to believe that the experimental condition is worse than treatment as usual. We wouldn't even start the study if we thought that. I mean, why do that? You couldn't get this study proposal past an institutional review board if the body of evidence said that what you were proposing to do to folks had poorer outcomes than treatment as usual. That seems pretty straightforward. But nor can you think necessarily, even though your hypothesis might be that the experimental condition is superior to treatment as usual, and you're probably conducting the study with that in mind as a hope, but you can't sell that. Really, you can't be in a position of saying, gee, we hope you get assigned to the experimental arm because we think that's a lot better, because that destroys this moment of equipoise. And more about that later. But the basis of the study, who you're including in the study, is that you are proposing to do good for people, regardless of what arm they get exposed to. That the experimental condition is at least no worse than the treatment as usual. The next element of biomedical ethics is this notion of do no harm. And there are a number of people who might want to participate in a study for whom participation, in fact, might be harmful. And so those folks get excluded, and we'll use the START study as an example. There was evidence from Europe, primarily France, that buprenorphine in combination with benzodiazepines had a higher fatality risk than just buprenorphine alone. And so the developers of the START study, recognizing that and not wanting to do harm to folks, said we're going to exclude people that had current benzodiazepine dependence from participation in this trial, because by putting them on this medication, by getting their participation in this study, we might be doing harm to those individuals. That's just one example. I'm sure everybody in the audience can think of more. But that's how inclusion and exclusion criteria are drawn to make sure that there's a fair subject selection and that there's randomization. Randomization really gets at justice. You're not cherry picking. You're not saying, okay, the people that look like this go to the experimental arm and the people that look like that go to the treatment as usual arm, because then you bias the study, and everything that you have done in terms of planning, the valid scientific question, the valid scientific methodology would be corrupted if you had a biased selection, and that's why the randomization is used. Moreover, when you're starting to recruit subjects, you're trying to make that as free of bias as you can so that you're broadcasting this to the general population to which your study might be pertinent. If those are opioid addicts, you might be advertising for them at needle exchanges. You might be advertising for them at crisis centers or who knows where. But you're not doing targeted recruitment in hoping to try to somehow bias the selection of participants to get into your study to try to sort of improve the probability that your intervention will work. Because in the whole idea in the CTN is to try to do randomized controlled trials in a broader population to see if this has effectiveness and not just the efficacy that it might have shown in smaller studies. Charlotte, any other things that you'd like to add about this?
Oh, I just wanted to comment that there's an interesting trend, I think, in regards to recruitment concerns. Historically, the concern was very focused on exploitation and I think more focused on the potential harms. But more recently, there's been, I think, a very much public awareness and movement towards ensuring equitability by various groups to the benefit of participation. And so the IRBs require that we're able to justify or explain why various groups were not included or approached. And of course, you know, we now have greater participation by females in research, children. And so that's been an interesting movement to watch.
So we've got an example here, I think. Is that what comes up next, Liz? So here's the situation for discussion. This comes from one of our contributors who responded to Liz by email, and we really appreciate this situation for discussion. Everybody can see it here. And so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to read it and think about it, and then I'm going to ask the operator to open the phone lines and get your thoughts on this. I'll try my best to be like Larry King. Syracuse, hello. Okay, would you open the phone lines, please?
Thank you. As a reminder to listeners, all lines will be open at this time. If your phone's on mute, please unmute. Lines are now open.
All right. So what do you think?
This is Davina from Willamette Family. This is actually an issue that we kind of talked a little bit about in between studies because obviously, you know, the implications of handing money to somebody that could potentially put them in a bad situation, you know, was something that was heavy on us. And in our early studies, we did use cash. And then recently, because of these issues, decided to switch to more of a gift card system, making it, you know, that they're compensated. It's a little more difficult. Obviously, they can't go buy drugs with a Walmart card. You know, they could obviously trade it for something else. But on our end, we're protected in that we've given them something that's not as easy to acquire some of the items that might do them harm.
Thanks, Davina.
Hi, this is Sue.
Yeah, hey, Sue.
Hi. I'd like to see some research on this, actually, because I have a lot of doubt that giving a gift card is going to be any better than giving cash. It would be different if cash were really difficult to obtain and were a major trigger, but people can get cash in a lot of places, and it's one of the first triggers I think that you have to learn how to deal with in any kind of relapse prevention work. So I personally don't have a problem with it, but I think it's a really good research question. You know, if you give a person cash or if you give them a gift card, which is going to be more predictive of relapse?
Well, Sue raises a really good point. Thanks, Sue. And Sue's talking from a CTP perspective. It is an interesting question that, by and large, this judgment is made on belief rather than on evidence.
Actually, this is Beth from TRI, and actually Gabe Bestinger from TRI actually has done some research showing that in urine tests that there was, in a comparison of vouchers versus cash, there was not more drug use. That doesn't mean that there wasn't more drugs used on a particular day, but in a urine test that just tested yes or no, was there more, did they have a higher frequency of use? There was not a greater frequency of use. And right now, he's running another study a bigger study where he's doing a comparison.
Great. So thanks for some evidence. That's wonderful.
And this is Rachel at CODA. We've found actually here in Portland, because our study has gained some popularity here, we have found several drug dealers that actually accept gift cards now at a lesser value so if you get a $25 gift card, they'll give you $15 worth of dope here. So it's definitely been interesting to see how the population has adjusted to a study that is no longer cash but is, voucher-oriented, that it still can maintain some of that, cash for drug value.
Where there's a will, there's a way, huh?
Exactly.
Yeah. Others, this is great.
This is Tom Hill from Bi Valley. Being in recovery myself and being a recovery opiate addict myself, I could say that without question, if I want to get something, I'm going to get it. And also with cash, I can pay my electric bill possibly. And that's something to think about too, because they do have to live places and they do have to pay some bills. And sometimes, a little bit of cash in hand allows them to pay for something that they wouldn't be able to pay for otherwise.
Thanks very much. That's a great perspective. Others?
Hi, this is Dorothy. I think that we still have to answer the question as to whether or not should individuals be compensated with money for their involvement just because they have a substance use disorder. And I think that our IRB perspective here at the University of Pittsburgh, you have to pay them. You cannot not pay them just because they have a substance use disorder, because then you're discriminating against them as compared to other participants who are not substance abusing people.
They are adults after all.
Yes, and they do have to be paid. I think that what we do, I think that all of the CTN studies have had very reasonable payments, and I think that they're always in line with what would not be considered to be extraordinary payments, and every other drug study that we've done here has had similar compensation. So I think that none of that could be construed in any wrong way.
Well, there you have it. That's very interesting. Dorothy has introduced the whole concept of an institutional review board, or an IRB. And IRBs, rightfully so, weigh in on this issue of compensation, not only yes or no, but what's a reasonable amount. And by reasonable amount, they're not only talking about what might do no harm to the patient in terms of giving them something that they might harm themselves, whether cash or voucher, but also so that the amount of money offered is not coercing them into a study that might not be in their best interest. In other words, if I'm homeless and I'm hungry for food and somebody's offering me $1,000 cash money, I might jump on it and not really worry too much about whether or not I'm going to be harmed by that intervention.
This is Lois from the Treatment Research Institute, and I just want to tag on to what Beth Rosenwasser mentioned about David Festinger's research that relates to the dollar amount. I'm probably distorting some of his findings or his design, but I think in the initial study what they looked at was capping the amount of money at $70 and seeing if it made a difference in terms of drug use, and again, gift certificates or vouchers versus actual cash. and they didn't find that was problematic for those individuals. And I think the present study, he's testing $140 or up to $170 maximum that somebody could earn, probably not in one fell swoop. It'd probably be distributed over a couple of different assessment periods. But he's testing how much is too much.
Thanks a lot. Other thoughts, please.
Hi, this is Scott from Northern New England. One thing we did in one of our recently completed CTN studies, we've had to adjust the compensation amount about a year ago during the summertime when the gas prices were really high, because we found that a lot of people weren't able to make it into their research visits because gas was costing a fortune. So we went through the IRB. We got the compensation raised for the research visits, and it worked out much better. But, yeah, that was one thing we had to factor in.
So a change in the costing changes that reasonableness standard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
Hi, this is Diane from CODA. I'm wondering if anybody has concern about keeping cash on the property. I mean, when we buy our gift cards or vouchers, we buy several $1,000s worth at a time, and I would be a little concerned having cash on hand here at the treatment center.
Diane, in New England, we typically give them sort of like what the site would need just for like a week or two period of time. So at the site, there isn't too much money on hand, and they have to keep it under several different locks and track it every week with how much they actually have there to make sure that nothing happens to it. But we make sure from the RRTC side that they have what they need for the participants, but it's not too much, that there's temptation, and that clients also don't necessarily know where they're storing the money, so that there's temptation from, clients or staff or anything to try and get to that cash box.
At Pittsburgh, we use a prepaid Visa card, and they can actually take it to an ATM and cash it out for cash, or they could use it, anywhere they want. But it's loaded only by our computer, and it's loaded with their special 4-digit number. So most all we use that kind of system.
Anybody else got anything to say?
This is Beth from Florida. We saw that we have locks and keys and safes bolted to the ground, and we count every day and every week. We've had gift cards stolen. So, but not since we've added extra double bolts, etc. And more checks. We also keep some on site at the parent company and only transfer out up to $2,000 or so to the site itself, so we limit the possibility of how much could get stolen. But I've been interested in using that, loading a Visa card, and wondering if the cost of that is prohibitive, except in large studies.
Hi, this is Dorothy at the University of Pittsburgh at ATS Node. We holders to go into this is a MasterCard branded debit card, basically.
We had too much petty cash being stolen. Western Psych had participant payment checks that we had set up that were called PAR checks. Someone figured out how to counterfeit those, and we lost hundreds of thousands of dollars throughout the institution based on that. And so they had to come up with a mechanism for the entire university, and this is what we're using now is this debit card. But it is throughout the entire university, and we've done away with petty cash, checks, everything. The only thing we're allowed to use are these WePay debit cards.
And that's really wonderful, Dorothy. Could I ask, would you mind sharing some information with Liz Buttry here, who might be able to disseminate it to all of the attendees on today's call, because this might be something that other people would like to look into for their particular sites.
Okay, yeah, I can do that. And it is relatively easy to use, and the participants like it because they can use it at a point of sale anywhere. They can go up to the local bank that's involved in the whole thing and cash out the whole debit. And the good thing about it is you can keep reloading the card. So when they come in for their next study visit, we give them $20 more on the card so that they actually have a card that they can use ongoing throughout the study.
So if they needed the cash to pay their utilities or pay their rent, as a previous person made a point of, they can still do that. So they have a lot of flexibility.
Right, and you can go to the drugstore, buy a pack of gum, and ask for the rest of it back in cash. You just have to know what your balance is.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks. Anybody else got anything to say on the topic of fair subject selection, whether it's this situation or some other concern that they might have had about the fairness of subject selection? Wonderful. Well, thanks for your participation. That was great. So let's move along and talk about favorable risk-benefit evaluation.
All right, can we close the phone lines, please?
Lines are closed at this time.
Thanks a lot.
The principle of beneficence, or do good and do no harm, requires that the risk-benefit ratio must be balanced in favor of the patient, and that the participant welfare can't be compromised to achieve our research goals. I think the principle of autonomy and respect for persons, which holds that we can't use persons merely as a means to an end, either ourselves or others, is one of the underlying principles that really should be considered when we're looking at risk-benefit evaluation. When we talk about design and procedures being scientifically sound and minimizing risk and maximizing benefit to the degree that we can, I think that what we're talking about is that the assessment has to be systematic, to be looked at very carefully. And since there are different stakeholders in the process, there are typically different evaluations of the risk-to-benefit ratio. The PI will be looking at this from a design perspective and looking at whether or not these particular protections have been thought out and accounted for in the design of the study. But what are some things that we can clearly do when we assess the justifiability of research? The first thing would, of course, be that inhumane treatments would never be justified. And I put that out there just because it has been the precipitating factor for so much regulation and seems like something that would be not even necessary to mention, but historically has happened, and oftentimes for reasons that may have more to do with expediency than someone wanting to do the wrong thing. When looking at risk ratio benefit, or the risk benefit ratio, that we should reduce the risk to only those that are absolutely necessary to answer the research question and to reach our objective. Always need to consider, are there other alternatives? Perhaps one alternative is that we don't include certain participants in a specific research study. And when vulnerable subjects are involved, we have to be very careful to outline the reasons why they've been included and to look at whether or not the degree of risk justified by the potential for benefit. And the informed consent is actually probably one of the main ways in which we try to make sure that patients are aware of what the risks and benefits are. But actually, the same principles would say that we have to document and take the time to discuss with the patients what it is that they're signing up for. In 006 and 007, for example, one of the things that was looked at very closely was whether or not patients with gambling histories should be included. And that ended up being an exclusion, part of the exclusionary criteria. And also a question that came up was whether or not it was respectful to include participants who already believe that they never win. And maybe they never have. So one of the ways in which we can evaluate is to look at whether, for example, with contingencies, the reinforcement schedule minimizes any potential harm to the subject. Ron, would you like to add anything?
I don't think so. You've covered it quite well, Charlotte.
And I just wanted to add in regards to direct or secondary benefit, and Ron, I think, will speak more about this later, therapeutic misconception. But the consent form and any discussion with a patient needs to be very clear about direct benefit, which is benefit perhaps to the person, and indirect benefit or secondary benefit, which is the knowledge to be gained, which may help other people.
Yeah, for example, the START study has a sub-study looking at genetics, and we're very clear in the consent process to the folks that by their consent to give us an aliquot of their blood to be analyzed for pharmacogenetics purposes, it's not going to benefit them. It's highly unlikely to benefit them at all directly. But the indirect benefits will be to society as a whole through the knowledge gained by doing those genetic analyses.
Thanks, Ron.
Yep.
When we take a look at and talk about independent review of research and in regards to human subject protections, there are actually two levels of protection. I'm going to talk briefly about the first, which is the IRB, and then Ron will talk about the Data Safety Monitoring Board. One of the most important protections in human subjects regulation is that of independent review. The IRBs have a slightly different role, broader, I think, in some respects more general, than that of the DSMB. The members of the IRB are typically volunteers. They come from diverse backgrounds, although there's always someone who represents the population of the study on the board. There are many different perspectives being brought to bear. The IRB is responsible for really looking to see what we've planned, our protections in place, initial review. They look to be sure that the protocols are scientifically sound, and they evaluate things like whether or not our subject selection appears to be appropriate, and if we minimize risk and maximize benefit. They look at the plans for data and safety monitoring to ensure that adequate plans are in place and that the compensation, as we've discussed earlier, to participants is appropriate. Also that recruitment ads are not misleading and that they don't constitute undue influence. And all of these protections at the time that the IRB does the initial review, I think are expected to be in place, but it is not until the point of continuing review, which is often a year later, that the IRB gets an update of the progress of the study, adverse events. Serious adverse events are reported throughout the trial, but adverse events at our IRB are accumulated and looked at the end of the year. So although the Institutional Review Board has the authority to either approve or reject research or to request modification of the protocols and to set the schedule for monitoring, they are not looking at necessarily at any point in time individual safety. It is not their primary focus. It's one of the things that they are looking at and trying to ensure. Ron, do you want to talk a little bit about how that might differ from the Data Safety Monitoring Board focus?
Right. The Data Safety Monitoring Board, or DSMB, is really the entity that's paying the closest attention to the trial once it starts running. DSMBs vary in terms of their frequency of meetings. Some meet quarterly on a particular study. Some meet semi-annually. It really has to do with the recruitment and the study plan, how often DSMBs are going to meet. They are constituted by sometimes the program sponsor. So, for example, NIDA constitutes the DSMB for the START study. Sometimes they're constituted by the principal investigator themselves, drawing from experts in the field. There's a variability, but for the CTN studies, the DSMB is assembled by the sponsor, by NIDA, the CCTN, to pay attention to a number of things. And their role is really health and safety of the participants and also integrity of the data. They are there to make sure that the study is being conducted appropriately, that they're following the protocol, and that the principal investigator and staff have to articulate and explain protocol violations, articulate and explain not only serious adverse events, but other adverse events as well, particularly as it relates, obviously, to patient safety. In the case that the study is blinded or perhaps double-blinded, the DSMB is often unblinded so that they can see if there is a difference between treatment arms. In many cases, there are stopping rules. In other words, we've learned enough now that we've learned that there are differences, and we don't need to expose any more people, and we need to make this more broadly available because there's a clear benefit of the experimental arm to the treatment as usual. Or, from the other perspective, we need to stop this trial because the experimental arm is causing unexpected adverse problems with the participants, and to continue on would be doing harm to those folks. We know enough now that we know that it's not appropriate to continue to randomize people to one arm or the other, either for good reasons or for harm reasons. So DSMBs conduct their work. They typically gather a lot of information. I know that Christy Thomas is on the call. I know that she and Al Hassan have to assemble an awful lot of information. When I've been on DSMBs, it takes typically several hours of reviewing study materials to be ready for a DSMB meeting and to sort through and to understand the independence of the DSMB as it relates to the study. That's kind of what I want to say about that. Charlotte, anything to add?
No, I think you did a great job, Ron, with just outlining what some of the differences are.
Yeah. I'm curious if anybody out there, I don't know how you'd signal it, if you have any questions or concerns about IRBs or DSMBs and the differences in their role.
Operator, can we go ahead and open up the phone lines to get that from the audience?
Not a problem. One moment.
Thank you.
Again, listeners, as a reminder, please make sure that your phone is off of mute. One moment.
Anybody got any questions, concerns, thoughts, input to this about independent review? It really is one of the guiding principles in conducting research safely and appropriately. Okay, I'll take that as a no, so let's go along and talk about informed consent. You can close the phone lines now, operator.
Thank you. Lines are now closed.
Thanks.
Thank you. Informed consent is a process, is fundamental to assuring that the research is ethical. Respect for persons requires that human subjects, to the degree that they're capable, be given the opportunity to decide what will or will not happen to them. Conducting informed consent well ensures that this protection and this principle is implemented. There are several, I want to say first that the notion of a person becoming a participant, I think, is really important. I believe that either Liz or Ron said that when we were talking earlier, but just because a person becomes a participant, it doesn't take away their personhood. So we always need to keep in mind that we are in a position of addressing someone about a very important decision, and one for which we're asking them to make a decision about something that might have risk for them. And so it's important that they receive all of the information that is necessary to make a good decision, and that the information provided is understandable, that the language is at an appropriate level, that the person has adequate time to discuss with us the protocol, what it says. If you think about it, oftentimes our informed consent forms, I'm sure as well as with the industry, are very long. And we're talking with participants who may have just come into the clinic that day for intake, or maybe in the middle of just starting to detox from substances. And so ensuring that they have a chance to not only read it, but hear it, ask questions, have it explained in a conversational manner, and to be able to, if necessary, and they'd like, take that form back with them to review with family or friends or a doctor. But I think that that is one of the areas in which we often struggle, because space is often at the sites difficult to find, so that we can ensure privacy and the amount of time it may be necessary to do the consent can't be rushed through. That we really give people and make sure they're aware that they have the right to choose to participate or not, and to withdraw from the study. That we let them know what it is, what requirements we're going to ask of them along the way. And I know that I read just recently that some studies have been done that indicate that a month into study, so a person's been coming for several weeks, oftentimes people don't really know what it is that they've agreed to. So even though we typically use a quiz and to ensure that the person does understand, the process would require that every time we see the patient, we ask any questions, any concerns. Do you understand what it is that we're doing or what will come next? This is a wonderful opportunity for the research assistant or coordinator to begin to build trust and a rapport with the participants. I think the notion that many patients may be referred by their therapist or physician to the study in a given clinic can imply that participation is looking out for what's best for them. My doctor suggested this, so it must be good for me. And just to make sure that the patients understand the difference between their agreeing to participate in research and their acceptance of treatment, and what they're getting from their physician as a private patient versus participating in a clinical trial. I also want to talk a little bit about two other aspects of informed consent that I've had the opportunity to experience. One is something Ron implied earlier, which was conveying to a participant that they will likely get one condition or the other, particularly in randomized studies. And I have seen that happen. And I believe that a large reason that happens is because there's terrific pressure, oftentimes experienced by RAs or coordinators or even PIs, to recruit. And definitely there's some conflict between ethics, I think, and pressure to recruit. That pressure just gets transferred. And in the CTN, that can come from NIDA to the lead node PI, to the PI on the node basis, and the coordinator, and so forth, down the line. Say that my staff on 28th, the ADHD adolescent trial, just as we had difficulties with recruitment, actually reached the point where they hated to be on the weekly calls. They were embarrassed. They were sometimes angry because although they had been trying, they were not able to recruit anyone, and clearly we had a burden to try to move the trial along and increase recruitment. So I think it's one of the things to really be aware of, and to open for discussion when, if you're coordinating a study and you're meeting with your staff, to talk about that pressure and how it feels, because I believe that that gets transferred then to the patients who may be pressured to participate in this study, and corners could be cut in this process, which is so important, out of pressure to just meet the goals. Ron, would you like to add anything to that?
Charlotte, I really want to echo that. This is one of the places where pressure, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so, really can put research assistants, study coordinators, everybody involved in the study at a place where they're starting to cut corners as it relates to respect for the patient's autonomy. They may be overselling subtly or explicitly the probability that the people will get into the arm that they want to get into. We were a site for CTN for the START study, and we would have people calling saying, I really want to get into buprenorphine treatment, can you guarantee that? And as Charlotte was talking about with 28 and 27, we had pressure. We were on calls to increase the recruitment rate, get numbers up, et cetera, et cetera. It would have been easy for the person handling that call to say, well, sure, come on down. We'll do our best to make sure you get that, and applying kind of subtle pressure and misleading the person about what the probability was that they were going to get that. And so this is one of the places where ethics meets the road as it relates to clinical trials conduct. And it's back also to the point that I talked about earlier on, that place of equipoise. The research staff can't be selling that one arm of the study is superior to the other, because in fact you don't know.
Exactly, and I think that pressure as well transfers to the clinic staff who aren't even involved in the study.
Absolutely. And we'll revisit this issue about pressure when we talk about the other pressure point in CTN studies, and that's retention. So, Liz, I think it's time for some of the polling questions here.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Okay. Informed consent is a document and process by which a person agrees to participate in a research study after being fully informed, a contract, or a release of clinic responsibility. The polls are now open. I'm going to go ahead and show the results to everybody. It looks like everybody's got this down pat.
Aren't we glad?
Aren't we glad? Right. And while we're doing the polling questions, let me just jump into the next one. If a patient at the time of randomization says, I am desperate for the best treatment available, will this help me with my addiction and my employer? What would you choose? We believe it would be helpful. No, probably not. We don't know which intervention is better. We hope it's helpful. Some people report it's helpful. Which one do you think is the best selection? Okay, right now I'll go ahead and I will close the polls, and I'm going to show the results. And if we can, Ron, take a minute to go ahead and discuss what the findings were, maybe clarify some things.
Okay, so are we going to show, which one are we going to show first? The first poll question?
Let's go ahead with the one we're on, since I've already got that opened up.
Okay. So the correct answer is actually the yellow answer. We don't know which intervention is better. That's back to the equipoise point that I just made. We really can't be selling snake oil here because we don't know which one is better. You could certainly say the treatment as usual arm is the treatment as usual arm, and there are people that come here and get help with treatment as usual, but we can't promise whether you will respond well to treatment as usual or you will respond well. It's back to the equipoise part. you really can't say we believe it will be helpful because you don't know that. That's why you're doing the study, is to find out whether it's going to be helpful or not. I'm sure that there are folks that believe that the exercise will benefit people, but we wouldn't be doing the study if we knew that exercise was going to benefit. So it's an open question, and that's what research is all about. Charlotte, anything more to say?
No, I think you covered it well.
Okie dokie.
Let me try to hop back to the informed consent.
That's the one that we wanted to see. No need to debrief on that one.
Yeah, it looks like everybody really got it on that one. So
hooray, hooray, hooray.
Yay. I'm going to jump back to the presentation here.
And so now we're going to move along and ask, operator, would you open the phone lines, and are there any audience questions or feedback or stuff they'd like to talk about as it relates to informed consent?
Sir, would you like me to open lines at this time?
Yes, please.
Lines are now open.
Hi, it's Gloria from the Long Island Node. We definitely ran into this in CTN 15, the Women in Trauma study, because when people were coming to treatment and realizing that there was a trauma protocol, they really wanted to participate in the trauma protocol. But there was randomization, obviously, involved in that trial. So we had to do a lot of work with every level of staff around this issue of equipoise and, just making sure that they weren't selling one treatment over the other. And there was disappointment at different levels for people who got the control treatment as opposed to the experimental specific trauma treatment. So it definitely was an issue for us, and what we had to do from the lead perspective was just provide a lot of support to the research staff as well as the clinical staff around being neutral involving the protocol.
Great. Thanks, Gloria. Nice to hear your voice again, and thanks for that great example. And Gloria rightfully brings up a very important point, and that's the role of supervisor and lead team to give support. Doing the right thing sometimes is doggone hard, and it comes at an emotional cost. We'd like to believe that the experimental condition is going to be better. We'd like to believe that what we're doing is helping people more than they might otherwise get help. And so trying to keep that balance point is a very, very difficult thing to do. So thanks for bringing that up, Gloria.
Since this is Rachel at CODA again, we were in the START trial, or still in the START trial, and, we would get people calling saying, oh, we want to be in that BUP study, and everybody, wanted BUP. And so it was a lot of, really talking to people about concerns about both medications, about, educating people as well as trying to get them as informed as possible while obtaining that consent. And even still, people would get randomized to methadone and then walk, that same day. So it's really, it's about not only just making sure that they understand what the study is about, but educating them about the aspects of the study as well.
Great, thanks. CODA is one of our sister agencies in this. We've all struggled with that, Rachel. Other thoughts? Okay, great. Operator, you can go ahead and close the phone lines now, please.
Lines are now closed.
All right, so moving along to the next one. This is respect for enrolled participants. Now they're in the study. They're no longer applicants, they're now participants. And that issue of therapeutic misconception will continue along. Just because they understood it at the informed consent does not necessarily mean that they will remember that. I thought you told me that BUP was going to be better. How come those incentives aren't greater? How come I'm not getting them at a faster rate? How come I got assigned to this other group and it's not working? All my spouse is in the other arm and she's doing a lot better than I am. All of those kinds of things will come up over the course of the trial. The longer the trial exposure, the more issues will come up over time. And it takes a lot of persistence on the part of the whole research staff, and a lot of information sharing, not just between research staff and participants, but up the line. One of the great benefits of having phone calls between with sites in particular studies is that we can learn from each other, and we can talk about how. So, for example, Rachel might have told my staff how they were dealing with that issue of people wanting the Butte study and so forth and so on. Talking about the impact of doing this with supervisors, we've talked about that all along. The third bullet is very critical, and this is where retention and ethics hits the road. We give participants, because respect for patients' autonomy is one of the cornerstones of biomedical ethics, we give them the right to withdraw at any time, and the IRBs make us promise, rightfully so, that withdrawal won't prejudice them in any way from access to other things. For example, if somebody withdraws from the START study here at my agency, they are fully eligible to continue in treatment here at this agency with no loss, no problems, no stain on their record, no nothing. And yet, there's pressure to keep people in the study. And so a patient comes to you and says, you know, I'm really thinking about dropping out of this particular study. And research staff feel the pressure to try to keep them in. And so there's a very fine line between trying to induce that person emotionally using your good selling skills to keep them to stay in the program when, in fact, they really do want to withdraw. And you have to respect that right to withdraw. You've given it to them. You've got to respect it. All of our records, research records and then clinical records, are protected under 42 CFR. That's the federal statute and Code of Federal Regulations that protect the confidentiality of patient records. And those are very explicit, and they say that you cannot disclose information without patient consent except in some circumstances, and I'm not going to go into all the circumstances. But one of the funny circumstances relates to the certificate of confidentiality. The studies that we do in the CTN get a federal certificate of confidentiality, which is actually a higher level of protection of confidentiality. I've had judges here try to seek records relating to a patient who was in research and also in clinical treatment. They'd been in clinical treatment, then they were in a research project, and then they were out of the research project into clinical treatment, and they wanted all of their records, and they were subpoenaing those records under 42 CFR. And I had the opportunity to tell the judge, I'm sorry, Your Honor, you can have the records of everything except what went on in the research protocol, because those are protected by a federal certificate of confidentiality. And confidentiality extends, so not only is the research staff not to be talking about what's going on with the patient to other patients in the research study, they're not, in many cases, even supposed to be talking about what's going on in the research study with some of the clinical staff as it relates to, for example, the positive urines that or urine results that are generated for research purposes. We'll talk a little bit more about that in some of the examples that you're going to see here in just a little bit. And yet there's a lot of pressure on research staff to keep people enrolled. There's pressure on the research staff from sometimes the clinical staff to discuss patient cases and so forth and so on. In my experience over the years, this is where a lot of the tension and conflict sometimes arise both between research staff and between research and clinical staff in community treatment programs. And last but not least is the issue of monitoring participant welfare. The study is the study, but the patient welfare transcends the needs of the study. That's why we are not suppressing but reporting systematically serious adverse events, and regardless of whether the person reporting them thinks that they're study related or not, that's really not your concern. You just need to say what's going on with somebody. And our research staff here, for example, have brought to the study investigators issues relating to somebody being in the study and their welfare, the fact that they were homeless, the fact that they had a fulminating case of pneumonia, a variety of different other things. And so this respect, the extension of these principles of biomedical ethics continues and I think even accelerates once the person's in the study. So let's go to a polling question first, and then we're going to go through 4 separate situations that have been submitted to us from some of the participants. So, Liz?
I think we did the polling question, Ron.
So did we?
We did, with the therapeutic misconception. So
okay, great.
There, sorry.
All right, no worries. So let's go. Here's the first situation. So like we did before, we're going to leave it on the screen for a little bit, and then when we're open up the phone lines, I'll tell you when in a second, operator, and we'd like for you to weigh in on this.
One moment, sir.
All right, take it away.
Lines are now open.
All right. So there you go, folks. What do you think, gang? Is that the right answer?
So your client has a positive drug test for the research study, but a negative one for the clinic. The clinician is talking to you about how well the client is doing, but you know that they've been using. The clinician asks you about all of their tests, and are they coming back for the study? And you know that they've been positive, but you can't tell them. Any comments on this?
Hi, this is Bridget.
Hi, JJ.
Hi, hello?
Hi.
Hey, go ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, you don't know that the client's been using because there are false positives as well as false negatives in urine tests, which is, probably why there is a difference in that test. And as far as you knowing things for the study, a clinician should understand this about confidentiality. We haven't had a problem with that at our program. We just say, we have to keep it confidential.
Right. Thanks, Sue.
You're welcome.
Some agencies are new to the research world and don't understand about that wall that exists between research information and clinical information.
Hi, my name is Dr. Sheehan. I'm from Operation PAR.
Hi.
And I completely understand this wall that we're putting up between the clinical and the research. The problem in this situation is that we don't know what tests, we should know what tests we're doing in the research, but we don't know what tests are being done in the clinic. And it's quite possible that we're using more specific tests than they're using in the clinic. So, for instance, if a person is on buprenorphine and the clinician is saying, oh, yeah, well, we know the tests are coming back negative, if they're testing just for opiates, that's what you would normally expect. So, I would use it as a teachable moment for the clinician to ask them about what the specifics are of their tests that they're using and let them know that what tests are available without giving any information specifically about the client.
Great.
So I know there's a wall, but obviously, what are you supposed to do? Can you just forget about the clinician and say that, well, that's tough luck? Or in general, can we use that as a teaching issue with the idea that you may be touching on confidentiality issues because you know something that they don't know or may know something that they don't know?
Well, he points out a very important issue, and it's all about relationships. And in many of the CTN studies, the research staff live and eat and work alongside the clinical staff. And so you've got to be respectful of that relationship while still enforcing the strictures of the confidentiality that was guaranteed through the IRB, through the protocol, and guaranteed through the other processes.
This is Davina again, and we have found that to be a fine line in our agency with studies too, and have had a few times where clinicians have come in and asked specifically, and we've had to tell them that this is a protected, thing. I'm sorry, we can't share this, and they have gotten angry, but we've been able to, again, just really let them know about how we protect the confidentiality of the clients and how separate we try to really keep some of the stuff into research. But it's a difficult situation. I can understand their perspective in wanting to make sure that their client is doing the best. So it's a fine line, and we try to make people as happy as possible.
Thanks, Davina, and I would imagine you've also probably gotten some help from the agency administration so that they can kind of reinforce that separation of information.
We have, and also having had on past studies, we actually have had a clinician that acted as an RA who now is in more of a clinician role, and it's been nice for her perspective because she's been on both sides and she's able to help explain to them, the differences. So, we're doing what we can.
Great, thanks, Davina.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, this is Dr. Sheehan again from Operation PAR.
Yep.
And yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And the question about the positive and negative drug screens is also interesting because I'm also working as a medical review officer, so I get to see a lot of the drug screens and be commenting on positives and negatives. And the cutoffs on different drug screens and the timing of different drug screens can make a big difference.
Sure.
So you may get a positive and they may get a negative, and that may be fine. And a negative, if the person is being looked after by family services, or that there may be a major significant impact on the child, the person's child being lost to protective services if their test is positive in the clinic, may be a significant issue, but all that information is totally protected in the research division.
Great. So speaking to sometimes the lack of comparability in terms of cutoff standards between drug tests done clinically versus done for research.
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I just had two quick comments. This is Charlotte.
Sure.
This is something that during the site selection process typically comes up when we sit down with the director and the clinicians and talk about what the study is about and what it's like to participate in research. And I really like what you said about it's important to reinforce that message should the site participate. I think that can be very helpful and take a lot of pressure off the research staff. And the other thing I wanted to say is in regards to beneficence, that we say we will do no harm, and if we have a participant in the study who is on probation, who may have negative consequences if a positive test is reported to the clinic, it creates, I think, a real tension and is definitely a disservice to the participant. And the result of that, it can affect the conduct of the study because patients talk. And if you don't honor that confidentiality and they do suffer negative consequences as a result, a lot of ramifications.
Okay. Ron, let's go ahead and take an opportunity and go to the next situation.
Right.
Great. I'll go ahead and read it. A client's mother calls you asking if they have come in today for their appointment. You tell them first that you can't confirm or deny whether they have been at the clinic. The mother is really worried and asking for your help. You don't have permission to give any information on this client to her. Any comments on that?
Well, the phone lines are still open, I hope.
The phone lines, yes, they are open.
They are open, sir.
Thanks.
Well, this is Davina again. What I would say in this situation is, after letting her know that we cannot confirm or deny is if this puts somebody who is supposed to be in treatment, I would refer this to their counselor. That person has more authority to be able to discuss whether or not that person came for their portion as to whether we can.
This is a difficult one emotionally, isn't it? I've been on the receiving end. I imagine a lot of you have too, of this kind of phone call, and it tears at your heart. You've got a distraught parent wanting to find out about the health and safety of their child and their adult child, and they're just distraught, and basically you're having to invoke the confidentiality protections, and at the same time listening to their emotions and kind of letting them ventilate, and like Davina was saying, maybe think that there might be some way of taking this person's name without a number, without that act confirming or denying somebody's in treatment, if there were, see if the clinician that's assigned to this case might have some more information or be able to get a release from the participant?
This is Mary Lise from Pittsburgh. One way around that is at the very beginning of the study, when you're doing informed consent, you can talk to the participant about signing a release of information for emergency situations so that you can speak to a parent. Like, when you come in, this is just a sign that if your mom calls because, you know, or you fall and you need to go to the doctors, that we're able to tell her. If they choose not to sign that, then you're back to square one with this. But if they do choose to sign it, you can say, yeah, they were here for their appointment. I don't know if, you know, every site can do that, but that's one way of having to deal with the parent and the mother. Just on the information would just be like to confirm that they were at the appointment with no other information. And that sometimes we've done that in the past. Not that we've needed to use it, but that kind of covers the emergency and the, if they missed the bus and they weren't here, or, because some of the kids would come straight from school on a regular PAT bus, not a school bus, and they'd get in if they were delayed, and the parents sometimes would call just for a safety reason, did they make it in? And we couldn't really tell them unless we had the kids sign that release of information with the parents saying that, yeah, we're allowed to say if he made it in or not. I don't know if that helps, but suggestion.
I think that's very respectful of the participant, because if you get the release of information form, you're going to be talking about what kinds of things it's okay to disclose. So if you do that up front, you can avoid perhaps some of this coming up, or having, mom leave the line extremely upset, or the research participant feeling like their confidence has been violated.
Anybody else got anything to say about this particular situation?
This is Rachel, again from CODA. We actually had an interesting situation about a year ago where a mother called in as she had pricked her finger on a needle in her son's closet. She knew her son was in the study, however, there was no release to talk to her, and she was concerned about, we do HIV and hepatitis screens, and concerned about his status and if she needed to go to the hospital about this needle prick she had received. And so it was definitely a situation where, you have to, you can't release anything, but still trying to, really trying to figure out, well, how do you handle something like that? And in the end, we ended up, not releasing anything, obviously, but, saying that anytime you get a needle stick, it's always good to go into the emergency room. But this kind of situation is not just an information, but can also be a safety issue as well.
Sure. And you relied on giving general health and safety information.
Yeah.
Yep. The right thing to do, Rachel. Anybody else? All right. Let's move along to the next situation.
Okay. All right, you accidentally skip a question on one of the assessments. You think that you know how the client would respond and are tempted to complete the question on the CRF. You know that your site will have data queries if it is left blank, and you don't want to mark your really good data record. Do you fill it in with the information you think is correct?
This is Tom from Bi Valley. Absolutely not.
Attaboy, Tom.
But you do try to get a hold of the client and get them to answer the question.
That's where a good sense doesn't give in to temptation, right?
Right.
Any other thoughts about this?
Rena here from the Southwest Node, coming out of Lurker Node. I just wanted to add to what Tom was saying. Just make sure that you document on the CRF or somewhere that it's a late entry with your initials and a date and what happened and why it was omitted, what the participant's answer is.
Great. That's great. I've never heard the term lurker mode. That's great. All right. Anything else for the good of the order on this one? How about the last one?
You have a husband and a wife that are both participating in the study. You've developed a great rapport with both of them during all of their studies thus far. They just received their test results last week, but the husband has not told the wife about his results. She starts asking you about it during her appointment. You have to let her know that you can't share this information, but she's getting very upset. Any thoughts? So, Ron, this would be another situation where, support from other people on the site might be kind of helpful. What do you think?
I can't underemphasize, or excuse me, I can't overemphasize, it's the wrong way of saying it, the importance of support. Research staff, just like clinical staff, get put in difficult situations where the ethics of the situation, the laws of the situation are that they have to behave a particular way. That way may not necessarily feel that great emotionally, and I would certainly encourage that person to debrief the situation with their colleagues, with their supervisor, with other study staff, if nothing else, just to get reinforcement for having done the right thing in the right way. Validation is important too.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have anything to say about this particular situation? So are there any other challenges, this is at the risk of opening a can of worms here, are there any other challenges with respect for enrolled participants that we haven't talked about that you'd like to talk about?
This is Ed Weiss in Philadelphia.
Ed?
Hi. We're doing ourselves a disservice if we don't admit the context in which we're doing our research. We're involved in mental health, and when you're dealing with mental health, you're dealing with some very strong relationships and expectations between the counselor or primary therapist and the patient. And some of that may look sort of coercive even. The kinds of decisions that an autonomous subject may want to make may be counter to what the recovery and the relationship with his primary therapist is all about, like making commitments and sticking to them and things of that sort. And if we don't at least admit that this arena that we're in of mental health is relatively delicate, and we're dealing with people who might have a brittle emotional vantage point from which they're trying to make decisions about joining a study, checking out of a study, continuing, complying, and things of that sort. I think we're doing ourselves a disservice if we don't understand that context.
So, Ed, just for a point of clarification, are you including under mental health addictive disease as well, or are you really just talking about those individuals who might be participants who, in addition to their addictive disease, have mental health problems?
I'm talking about substance abuse as a chronic mental health condition, and that the recovery process normally includes them relating directly with a therapist.
Well, I'm sure that you probably know, Ed, that there have been people who have written about that whole issue about, first of all, what is autonomy in someone who is in the throes of an active addiction? Who's doing the choosing? Is it their addiction that's doing the choosing, or is it the person who suffers from that addiction? And Art Kaplan, who's a bioethicist at the University of Pennsylvania, has a good article about that particular thing. But it is well to keep that in mind. Ed's suggestions are good. Others have a point of view? You know, I know that in our town, for example, when access to methadone treatment is very scarce, that we sometimes kid ourselves that people are entering voluntarily. They're entering a treatment study that might give them access to methadone treatment because it's the only port in the storm. All right. So, and if there are no other thoughts here, let's go ahead and close the phone lines, please, operator, and we'll put up the next slide.
All phone lines are closed at this time.
Thanks.
Thank you. Liz, thank you for this pyramid. It's a great representation of what we've covered today, looking at the foundation for the conduct of ethical research is the principles that we've discussed, the respect for persons, beneficence, justice, and of course to do no harm. The goals certainly represent all of the individual items that we've discussed, and these are actually how we apply these ethical principles to the conduct of research. In addition, we have to support us and fall back on when there's a question, the regulations which are designed to protect the patients, IRB approval, and the whole process of informed consent. And then in regards to actions, our hope was that today by discussing these various principles in regards to how do you actually implement them, what do you do when a dilemma comes up, there have been a number of recommendations and a lot of discussion about ways in which, or resources to refer to, confronting day-to-day ethical challenges and also in performing ethical practices that ensure that human subject protections are in place. Does anyone have a question or comment about any of the topics that we've covered today?
So, operator, you can open the phone lines, please.
Lines are now open.
Any questions or comments, anybody? That's great. I'll just go ahead and talk about some of the handouts that we have. We, of course, are going to give you the presentation handout. We have a primer for ethical analysis, which I can go ahead and show you on screen. I believe, no, I can't. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about was we had gotten an article in from Grady regarding the importance of education in ethics. And is it coming up?
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, it's not showing. Okay, there we go. And Ron, can you cover this real quick?
Yeah, I can. The good news is that you haven't wasted your time today. That's the takeaway message. She and her colleagues in this study described the methodology, but the bottom line is, and you can barely make it out in the conclusion, it says that ethics education has a significant positive influence on moral confidence, moral action, and the use of ethics resources by nurses and social workers. So having been exposed to education about ethics actually makes people tend to behave more ethically. Hooray!
Yay! So I'll go back to the PowerPoint. Thanks, Ron. I appreciate that. So I also found some resources online to help you with some research ethics, and we are going to include the ethical primer analysis. One of the other things that I wanted to bring to your attention was not to forget the fact that the CD is available by various sources, both, including LiveLink, the CTN Dissemination Library, and all the node coordinators get an inventory of CDs for which they can distribute through the site. So if you would like to have a CD and you haven't received one from the node coordinator, just give them a holler and they probably will be able to send it on over to you. Or you can make a request directly to me at ctntraining@ms.com. The other thing I wanted to remind everybody is the ability to get some continuing education credits from some of the courses that we have through the web seminar series. The translation is 1 hour equals 1 CME or 0.1 CEU or 60 minutes. But the Society of Clinical Research Associates accepts participation documentation for recertification. It's a program that's applicable, to clinical research regulations, operations management, or within the therapeutic area of interest, which does apply to our particular web seminar series courses. So I would encourage you to do that if you're looking for continuing education credit. So the next thing I show is just the information for the CTN Dissemination Library so that you can download this. And a lot of the articles, there's a lot of articles there that are really, really applicable to some of the topics that we've talked about today, as well as the recording will be there in a day or two. And I wanted to bring your attention to the fact that the web seminar series for 2010 will be coming, and to keep your eyes peeled for that. And this concludes the presentation for today. And thank you guys very much for all your participating and for joining with us today. Ron, Charlotte, thanks very, very much.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Charlotte. Thanks to all the participants. We really enjoyed it. I hope you did too.
Thank you. Liz, thanks a lot.
You're very welcome, everybody. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye,
everyone.